The first thing anyone learned about High King Aldric Stormborn was that he did not sleep. Not really, not for 20 years. The servants whispered about it in the stone corridors of Ravencrest Keep, how the candles in the royal study burned until dawn, how the king would pace the battlements at 3 a.m. with a bottle of whiskey in his weathered hands, how sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, you could hear him screaming. Not the commanding roar of an alpha king rallying troops to battle. Not the authoritative bark of orders being given. Just screaming, raw and broken and utterly human. The second thing people knew about King Aldric was that he had won the War of Ashmar 20 years ago, that he had led 10,000 men against 30,000 enemies and emerged victorious, that he had saved the kingdom at a cost so terrible that the history books still debated whether the price had been worth paying. 5,000 men had died in the final battle at Blackwater Ridge. The river had run red for 3 days. They said you could walk across the corpses from one bank to the other without getting your boots wet. What the history books did not record, what no one dared to speak aloud in the halls of power, was that King Aldric Stormborn had died that day too. His body had survived. His heart had kept beating. His lungs had continued to draw breath. But the man who returned from Blackwater was not the man who had ridden out. He was a ghost wearing a crown. The third thing people knew about the king was that he had a daughter, Princess Lyanna, 15 years old, deaf since birth, and that he could not bear to look at her. On this particular morning, as gray dawn light filtered through the narrow windows of the keep, Aldric sat alone in his chambers, staring at a portrait on the wall. His late wife, Queen Isolde. She had died 15 years ago, 5 years after the war ended, 5 years after peace should have brought joy instead of tragedy, gone in blood and screaming and a choice he still could not reconcile with the man he thought he was. The bottle of whiskey sat empty beside his chair, the fourth one this week. It was only Tuesday. A sharp knock rattled the heavy oak door. Aldric did not move, did not acknowledge. His eyes remained fixed on Isolde's painted face, on the gentle curve of her smile, on the intelligence in her dark eyes that no artist could truly capture. She had been brilliant. She had been kind. She had loved him despite his flaws. And when the birthing bed had become a battlefield she could not survive, he had made a choice that haunted him still. The door opened without invitation. Only one man in the entire kingdom would dare. Commander Thorne Blackwood stepped inside, 45 years old, and carved from the same hard stone as the castle itself. His face bore the road map of a soldier's life, scars from blades, lines from squinting into too many suns, the permanent wariness of a man who had seen what men could do to each other when pushed beyond reason. "Your Majesty?" Aldric did not respond. His fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. The knuckles went white. The alpha dominance that should have made lesser men submit was buried so deep beneath grief that most people forgot what he truly was. Power unused becomes invisible. The princess has dismissed another tutor. Still nothing. Outside the window, ravens circled the eastern tower, black wings against a gray sky. Aldric watched them through his reflection in the glass, superimposed over his wife's portrait. 2 ghosts occupying the same space. "That makes 12. Thorne's voice carried no judgment, just fact, cold and immovable as winter. She threw a mathematics book at his head, drew blood. "He is demanding compensation." "Pay him." The words came out like gravel. Aldric's voice always sounded like this now, rough and abraded, as if he had spent the last 20 years swallowing broken glass. "Pay him whatever he wants. Find another tutor." "There are no more tutors, Your Majesty. Word has spread. No one in 3 kingdoms will take the position." Aldric finally turned. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale blue and utterly cold. The kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the absence of warmth. At 55, he still cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair silver white and tied back from a face that looked carved rather than born. The scar along his left cheekbone was a pale line against weathered skin, a souvenir from Blackwater that he touched unconsciously when the nightmares came. "Then let her be." His hand moved to the whiskey bottle, realized it was empty, dropped back to his lap. "She will learn nothing anyway. The healers said she cannot be taught." "The healers said many things." Thorne's tone stayed carefully neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or pity. They said she was cursed, that she would never understand language or reason, that she was little more than an animal trapped in a human body. And they were proven correct. Aldric stood, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man much older than 55. She screams, she breaks things, she attacks anyone who comes near. What would you call that, Commander, if not proof the healers were right? I would call it a child who cannot communicate and has never been taught how. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, the ravens cawed, harsh and mocking. Aldric moved to the window, his back to Thorn, his reflection a dark silhouette against the morning light. Below, in the courtyard, servants moved through their routines. Life continued. The kingdom turned. The world moved forward, while he remained frozen in a moment 15 years past. You forget yourself, Commander. No, Your Majesty. Thorn's voice hardened. They had been friends once, before Blackwater, before Isolde, before everything turned to ash and regret. Now they were just two old soldiers bound by duty and shared ghosts. I remember perfectly. I remember a king who rode to war with honor, who wept for every man lost, who swore he would build a kingdom worthy of their sacrifice. That king died at Blackwater. No. Thorn stepped forward, his boots heavy on the stone floor. That king came home and locked himself in this tower. That king chose to hide from his daughter because looking at her hurts too much. That king became a coward. Aldric spun, his hand dropping to where a sword would have hung if he still wore one. His eyes blazed with something that might have been rage, or might have been relief at finally feeling something other than numbness. For just a moment, his alpha nature flared. The air grew heavier. The temperature seemed to drop. Thorn felt the pressure, but did not step back. You dare. I dare because someone must. Thorn held his ground, beta discipline against alpha fury. Princess Lyanna is 15 years old. She has never had a real conversation with her father. She does not know if you love her or hate her or simply wish she had never been born. And every day she grows up a little more bitter, a little more violent, a little more convinced that she is the monster everyone treats her as. She carries her mother's face. Every time I look at her, I see Isolde dying. Then perhaps it is time to start seeing Lyanna living. Thorn's voice softened, just slightly. You are not the only one who lost someone that day. She lost her mother, and because you could not bear your grief, she lost her father too. I cannot even save myself. The confession came out barely above a whisper. Aldric turned back to the window, his shoulders sagging, the weight of crown and kingdom and 15 years of guilt pressing down until his spine bent beneath it. The alpha dominance drained away, leaving just a tired old man. Then perhaps you should find someone who can save you both. Thorn left without another word, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty chamber. Aldric remained at the window, watching the ravens circle, listening to the distant sounds of the castle waking around him. From somewhere deep in the keep, a scream erupted, wordless, furious, filled with a desperation so profound it made the stone walls shiver. His daughter. Aldric closed his eyes and saw Isolde dying, blood soaking through white sheets, her hand clutching his with fading strength as she whispered her final words. Save her. Promise me. Save our daughter. He had promised, and for 15 years he had failed. The scream came again, closer now, moving through the corridors like a physical thing. Servants would be scattering, hiding, waiting for the storm to pass. The princess having another episode. The cursed girl. The king's shame. Aldric poured himself a drink from a new bottle and did what he had done for 15 years. He looked away. 3 floors below, in the eastern wing where the princess's chambers overlooked the training yard, Lyanna Stormborn was indeed screaming. Not because she wanted to, not because she enjoyed the terror it brought to the faces of everyone around her, but because it was the only language anyone seemed to understand. She stood in the center of her destroyed study, books scattered across the floor, her mathematics lesson torn to confetti, the tutor's blood still fresh on her knuckles. 4 guards surrounded her, maintaining distance, hands on sword hilts, but not drawing. They had learned that lesson 3 tutors ago. The princess was small for 15, underfed from years of refusing meals she could not understand were being offered, her dark hair falling in tangles past her shoulders. She wore a gray dress that hung loose on her thin frame, the hem torn from where she had caught it on furniture during her last rage. Her eyes were the same pale gray as winter storms, and they held an intelligence that most people missed because they were too busy looking at her as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be understood. She was signing furiously, her hands moving in the complex system she had created over 15 years of isolation, a language built from desperation and observation and pure stubborn brilliance. 247 distinct signs, grammatical rules, syntactic structures, an entire linguistic framework constructed by a child with no teacher and no hope that anyone would ever learn to speak back. But the guards only saw a girl having a tantrum, a cursed princess throwing another fit. "Please, Your Highness," the youngest guard said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if volume could somehow bridge the gap between sound and silence. "You need to calm down." Liana signed something that was clearly not polite. Her hands slashed through the air with sharp, angry movements. She pointed toward the door, toward the dining hall beyond, her face twisted in frustration that bordered on anguish. "She wants to go outside," another guard interpreted incorrectly. "Should we take her to the gardens?" Liana screamed louder and signed more frantically. Not outside, not the gardens. She was trying to tell them she was hungry, that she had been locked in her study for 6 hours without food because the tutor had insisted on completing the lesson, that when she had tried to point toward the dining hall, he had grabbed her hands and told her to stop her nonsense, to focus, to try harder to be normal. And when he had grabbed her hands, when he had stolen the only language she possessed, she had done the only thing left to her. She had made herself heard in the most primal way possible. "Get the restraints," the lead guard said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We will have to confine her until she settles." Liana saw the leather straps coming, and something inside her broke. Not rage this time, not frustration, just a deep, hollow despair that made her want to curl up on the floor and stop fighting. What was the point? What was the point of trying to communicate when no one bothered to learn her language? What was the point of existing in a world that saw her as broken rather than simply different? She thought about her father, the king she had not spoken to in months, the man who looked through her rather than at her, who left rooms when she entered, who signed documents that determined her entire life without ever asking what she wanted. Did he even know she existed beyond being a problem to be solved? The guard approached with the restraints, his face set in grim determination, and Liana prepared to fight because it was all she knew how to do anymore. "Stop!" The voice came from the doorway, quiet, but carrying an authority that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with absolute certainty. Everyone froze. A woman stood in the entrance, 38 years old, and carrying herself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent years in places where showing weakness meant death. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her mouth too wide, her brown hair already showing threads of silver despite her relative youth. But her eyes were warm, the color of honey catching sunlight, and they held a directness that made people instinctively straighten under her gaze. Sarah Ashwood, Omega, widow, former battlefield medic, and completely unafraid. "Who are you?" the lead guard demanded. "How did you get into this wing?" "I walked." Sarah's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Her Omega nature should have made her submissive in the presence of aggression, but years of battlefield trauma had burned away that instinct. The servant entrance was unlocked. You should probably address that security concern. She stepped into the room, moving slowly, keeping her hands visible. Liana watched her with wary, red-rimmed eyes. Another stranger, another person who would look at her and see a problem. "This area is restricted. The princess is having an episode. You need to leave immediately." "The princess is trying to communicate." Sarah kept her eyes on Liana as she spoke, reading the girl's body language with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years treating patients who could not voice their pain. "She is hungry. She has been telling you for the past 10 minutes, but none of you speak her language." "Her language?" The guard's tone dripped skepticism. "She does not have a language. She is deaf, cursed. The healers said—" "The healers were idiots." Sarah cut him off without heat, still focused entirely on Liana. "And you are worse because you have eyes and still refuse to see." She raised her hands and signed, the movements clean and precise, Northern hand code learned 20 years ago in another life. "Hello, my name is Sarah. I can understand you." Liana's mouth fell open. Her hands dropped to her sides. For a moment she simply stared, unable to process what she was seeing. Then her hands moved, hesitant and disbelieving, asking a question in her homemade sign system that Sarah did not quite catch but could guess at from context. "You know signs?" Sarah nodded and signed back, switching to a simplified form that bridged the gap between her formal training and Liana's self-taught system. "I know signs. I learned many years ago to speak with someone I loved. I am sorry no one taught you properly before." That was wrong. The room had gone absolutely silent. The guards stood frozen, watching something they had never witnessed before. The cursed princess, the violent girl, the screaming monster, stood utterly still with tears streaming down her face and her hands trembling as she signed back. "No one understands me. I try to tell them and they just stare. And then they get angry because I am angry, but I am only angry because they will not listen." "I know." Sarah's signs were gentle now, full of the compassion that made Omegas natural healers. "I understand. You are not the problem. They are. Can you tell me what you need right now? What made you upset?" The story came out in a rush of signs, Liana's hands moving faster as the dam broke. The hunger, the tutor who would not let her eat, the grab, the loss of control, the blood, the shame, the endless, crushing loneliness of being trapped in her own head with thoughts and feelings and ideas that no one would ever hear. When she finished, Sarah signed back, "You are hungry. That is easy to fix. Come with me to the kitchen. I will get you food." Liana hesitated, her eyes searching Sarah's face for the lie, for the trap, for the inevitable disappointment that came from trusting anyone. "I promise." Sarah held out her hand, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. "Come, let us go eat." Liana's hand moved slowly, as if she expected Sarah to vanish like a dream if she reached out too quickly. When their fingers touched, when she felt the solid warmth of another human hand that was not grabbing or restraining or pushing away, something in her chest that had been locked tight for 15 years cracked open just slightly. She nodded. Sarah led her past the stunned guards, both of them signing as they walked. Behind them, the lead guard found his voice. "Wait, you cannot just take the princess. We have protocols. We need authorization." Sarah glanced back. "The princess is hungry, and I am going to feed her. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the king." They left the guards arguing among themselves and descended through the castle toward the kitchens, their hands moving in conversation the entire way. "How old are you?" Liana signed. 38. "Why do you know signs?" Sarah's hands paused for just a moment, and Liana caught a flash of old pain crossing her face before it smoothed away. "My son was born deaf. I learned to communicate with him. It seemed obvious." "Where is he now?" "Gone." Sarah's sign for the word carried weight beyond its simple meaning. "He died 8 years ago, but I never forgot how to sign. I am grateful I learned because now I can help you." "I am sorry he died." "Me too. But I am grateful I knew him. Grateful I learned his language. Grateful I can now teach yours." They pushed through the kitchen doors into organized chaos. Servants moved between ovens and cutting boards, preparing the evening meal hours early because the royal household ran like a military campaign. Efficient, precise, everyone knowing their role. At the center of it all, head cook Marin looked up from the vegetables she was chopping and froze. Her weathered face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, fear, confusion. And finally, when she saw Sarah signing to Liana, something like wonder. "The princess is hungry," Sarah said calmly, as if she had not just walked the supposedly violent girl through the castle without incident. "Can we get her some food, please?" Marin scrambled to plate bread, cheese, dried fruit, and cold meat. She set it on the table with shaking hands and stepped back quickly, as if Liana might suddenly attack. Liana signed to Sarah. "She looks scared of me." "She is not scared of you. She is scared she will do something wrong because she does not know how to communicate with you." Sarah signed back. "Most people are simply ignorant, not cruel. There is a difference." "What is the difference?" "Ignorant means they do not know better yet. Cruel means they do not care to learn. Ignorant can be fixed. Cruel is harder." Liana considered this while eating her food. She ate like someone starving, like someone who had learned not to trust that meals would come regularly. When she finally looked up, her signs were slower, more thoughtful. "When was the last time you had a full meal?" "Yesterday morning, maybe. I tried to tell them I was hungry at midday, but they thought I was asking for my tutor and sent me to lessons instead. And I got so frustrated I threw a book, and then they sent me to my room without dinner as punishment." Sarah's jaw tightened. "They punished you for being unable to communicate." "They punish me for many things. Being loud, breaking things, getting frustrated. They say I need to learn to control myself. Liana's signs grew sad. I try. I really try. But when no one understands me and I cannot make them understand, I do not know what else to do. You scream and break things because that is the only language they have left you. Sarah sat down across from her. But now you have me, and I understand you, so we can figure out better ways together. You will not leave. Liana's hands moved with absolute certainty. Everyone always leaves eventually. I am not going anywhere, I promise. Promises break sometimes. Not this one. Sarah signed with conviction that Liana could see in her eyes, in the set of her shoulders, in every line of her body. You have been alone for 15 years. That ends today. Liana's eyes filled with tears. She signed something in her home system that took Sarah a moment to interpret. Friend. The sign she had created years ago, hoping that someday she might have someone to use it with. Yes, Sarah signed back, her own eyes damp. I am your friend. Always. They sat together in the kitchen while Liana ate, signing about everything and nothing, building a bridge one gesture at a time across 15 years of isolation. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the doorway. King Aldric Stormborn stood in the shadows of the corridor, one hand braced against the stone wall, his face ashen. He had come down from his chambers seeking more whiskey, had heard his daughter's distinctive presence in the kitchen, had prepared to turn away as he always did, and then he had seen her signing, seen her communicating, seen his daughter, his cursed, unreachable daughter, having a conversation. Thorn materialized at his elbow. The commander had a gift for appearing when most needed or least wanted, depending on perspective. Who is that woman? Sarah Ashwood. Thorn kept his voice low. Former battlefield medic from the Ashmar War. Widow. Her husband died at Blackwater. She applied for the position of court physician last week. The council rejected her because she is Omega, and she knows sign language. Apparently, they watched in silence as Liana laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rough and unpracticed, as if her voice had forgotten how, but it was unmistakably joy, genuine, unfettered, pure. Aldric felt something crack in his chest. When was the last time he had heard his daughter laugh? Had she ever laughed? He could not remember. 15 years of living in the same castle, and he could not remember a single moment of his daughter's happiness. What have I done? The words came out broken. Thorn, what have I done to her? Nothing. That is the problem. Aldric watched Sarah sign something that made Liana's face light up. Watched his daughter respond with hands that moved like birdsong, swift and beautiful and full of meaning he could not understand. Watched a stranger give his child something he had never thought to offer. A language, a connection, a reason to believe she mattered. I need to speak with her. With the princess? With Sarah Ashwood. He stepped into the kitchen, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Servants straightened. Marin bowed. Liana's expression closed like a door slamming shut, all the joy draining away to be replaced by the wary defensiveness she wore around everyone, except, apparently, this one woman. The alpha presence, Aldric usually kept buried, rose slightly, filling the room with weight and pressure. It was instinct, not intention, but everyone felt it. Sarah stood, but did not bow. She met his eyes directly, and Aldric saw in them something he had not encountered in 20 years. Not fear, not deference, just judgment, pure and uncompromising. Your Majesty, you are Sarah Ashwood. I am. You know sign language. I do. And you have been communicating with my daughter. It was not a question. I have been speaking with Princess Liana, yes. We have had quite a pleasant conversation about hunger and loneliness, and the systematic failure of every adult in her life to provide her with basic communication access. The kitchen had gone utterly silent. No one spoke to the king like that. No one dared. Aldric's alpha nature flared again, an unconscious attempt at dominance. But Sarah did not flinch. Her Omega instincts should have made her submit, but she stood her ground with the calm of someone who had faced death and found kings less frightening. Aldric's face remained impassive. You presume much, mistress. I presume nothing. I state facts. Your daughter has been deaf for 15 years. In that time, no one has taught her proper sign language. No one has learned her home system. No one has treated her as anything other than a problem to be managed. That is not presumption. That is observation. The healers said she was unreachable. The healers were wrong. Sarah's voice could have cut glass. Your daughter is brilliant. She created an entire language by herself through sheer desperation and intelligence. She understands complex concepts. She has thoughts and feelings and opinions. She just cannot access spoken language the way you do. That does not make her broken. That makes her different. This Omega is out of control, someone muttered. Someone remove her before. Let her speak. Aldric's voice was cold. I want to hear this. Sarah took a breath and forced herself to calm down slightly. Princess Liana is one of the brightest people I have met. In the hour we have spent together, she has demonstrated remarkable intelligence and emotional depth. She is compassionate, thoughtful, and genuinely invested in understanding the world around her. She looked each person in the room in the eye. The only reason you think she is defective is because you have never bothered to actually communicate with her. You have judged her based on behavior that resulted from your failure to meet her needs. She screams because no one understands her. She throws things because she is desperate for any form of communication that gets a response. She acts exactly like any intelligent person would when trapped in complete isolation. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. The problem was never her, it was you. The color drained from Aldric's face. He looked at Liana, really looked at her for the first time in years, saw his wife's eyes, saw his own pain reflected back, saw a girl trapped in silence who had never asked to be born into a world that would not speak her language. I did not know she could tell me such things. You never asked, you never learned how. Then teach me. The words came out raw, stripped of all royal authority, just a father begging. The alpha dominance vanished, leaving vulnerability. Please, teach me to speak to my daughter. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Liana signed something quickly, and Sarah responded before turning back to the king. She wants to know why now. Why after 15 years of silence do you suddenly want to learn? Aldric looked at his daughter, really looked at her, saw the question in her eyes and the hope she was trying desperately to hide behind defensive walls. Because I was a coward, he said, his voice thick. Because looking at you hurt too much. Because I have been drowning for 15 years, and I forgot there was anyone else in the water with me. He paused, his hands shaking. Because you deserve better. Because I want to know my daughter before I die. Because I am so very, very sorry. Sarah translated into sign, her hands moving with gentle precision. Liana watched, her face working through emotions too complex to name. When Sarah finished, Liana signed back. She says... Sarah's voice caught. She says she has been waiting 15 years to hear you say that. Aldric's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself against the table, his breath coming in short gasps. 15 years of walls, 15 years of whiskey and nightmares, and running from everything that hurt, all of it crashing down in a kitchen surrounded by witnesses who would never forget this moment. Please, he said again, teach me how to tell her I love her. And Sarah did. She demonstrated the sign, hands moving to heart and then extending forward, offering, I love you. Simple, universal, powerful. Aldric copied the movement with his weathered soldier's hands, clumsy and uncertain, but unmistakably sincere. Liana stared at her father, at this stranger who wore the king's face but was doing something the king had never done. He was trying, actually trying, not just commanding, not just demanding she be different, but learning her language, meeting her where she was. She signed back, her own hands trembling. I love you too, Papa. I never stopped. When Sarah translated, Aldric made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. He opened his arms, uncertain, asking permission rather than demanding compliance. Liana hesitated for only a heartbeat before she stood and walked into her father's embrace. She fit against his chest the way she had when she was 2 years old, before the world went silent, before everything fell apart. He held her like he had forgotten how, like he was afraid she might break, like he could not quite believe she was real. I am sorry, he whispered into her hair, knowing she could not hear but needing to say it anyway. I am so sorry, sweetheart. Sarah watched with professional detachment that hid the fact that her own eyes were damp. She had not come here expecting this, had not expected to walk into the royal castle and find herself teaching a king how to love his daughter. But life had a way of putting you exactly where you needed to be, whether you wanted it or not. When Aldric finally released Liana, his face was wet, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. He looked at Sarah. You are hired, whatever you want, name your price. I do not want your money. Then what do you want? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I want authority to teach the entire palace sign language. I want Princess Liana to have real education adapted to her needs. I want her to have what she should have had from birth, a childhood, a family, a language. Done. All of it. Aldric's voice was hoarse but firm. You will be Princess Liana's official companion and instructor. You report directly to me. Whatever resources you need, whatever changes must be made, you make them. Just like that. Just like that. You gave me back my daughter in one afternoon. That makes you the most valuable person in this entire kingdom. Sarah inclined her head. I am Omega. People will talk. Let them talk. My daughter's well-being is more important than gossip. Anyone who has a problem with your status can take it up with me directly. The steel in his voice was unmistakable. Alpha authority reasserting itself, but for the right reasons now. And I promise they will not enjoy that conversation. Behind him, Commander Thorne cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if I may, the Council will have opinions about this arrangement. The Council can have all the opinions they wish. My decision stands. Aldric turned back to Liana and Sarah. Tomorrow we begin properly. Lessons for me. Education for her. Whatever it takes to make up for 15 years of failure. He paused. How do I sign goodnight? Sarah showed him. He practiced it 3 times before signing it to Liana with heartbreaking earnestness. Liana signed it back with the ghost of a smile. After Aldric left, trailed by Thorne, Sarah and Liana remained in the kitchen. The servants had returned to their work, but kept glancing over, spreading the story that would be all through the castle by nightfall. The cursed princess who was not cursed, the Omega who had spoken truth to power, the king who had learned to say, I love you, in a language he did not know existed that morning. Are you really staying? Liana signed. I am really staying. Promise. Promise. Liana studied her for a long moment, then signed something in her home system. Sarah waited for the translation. That sign means tomorrow. I made it when I was 7. I would use it to remind myself that maybe tomorrow would be better, that maybe tomorrow someone would understand. She paused. Thank you for making tomorrow come. Sarah had to look away until she regained control of her voice. When she looked back, she signed with absolute conviction. Tomorrow will be better, and the day after that, and the day after that. We will make sure of it. Together. They left the kitchen as night fell over Ravencrest Keep, 2 figures in the torchlight, one teaching and one learning, beginning the long work of building bridges across silence. Neither of them saw the second figure watching from the shadows of the upper gallery, a man with cruel eyes and a bitter mouth. Lord Corvin Ashford, head of the King's Council, whose carefully laid plans for succession had just been disrupted by an Omega servant and a breakthrough he had not anticipated. If the princess could communicate, if she could be educated, if she could potentially rule, then his nephew's claim to the throne became significantly weaker. He had spent 5 years positioning pieces on the board, cultivating allies, spreading whispers about the cursed princess who could never be queen. And now this woman had undone everything in an afternoon. Corvin's hand moved to the knife at his belt, hidden beneath his robes. Not yet. Too obvious. Too traceable. But soon. There were other ways to remove obstacles. Quieter ways. More permanent ways. He melted back into the darkness, already calculating, already planning. But for now, for this one night, Aldric Stormborn sat in his chambers with a new bottle of whiskey that would remain unopened. He stared at his wife's portrait and whispered words she would never hear, but maybe, somehow, knew. I found her, Isolde. Our daughter. I finally found her, and she is magnificent. For the first time in 15 years, High King Aldric Stormborn slept without screaming. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 3 months changed everything. The castle that had been a tomb became something resembling a home. The princess who screamed became a girl who laughed. The king who hid became a father who tried. But change, real change, never comes without cost. Aldric learned this truth one gesture at a time, his weathered soldier's hands struggling to form shapes that felt unnatural at first, then merely difficult, then finally something close to fluid. 2 hours every morning in the study with Sarah, drilling signs until his fingers cramped and his shoulders ached. He approached it like military training because that was the only framework he understood. Discipline, repetition, the slow accumulation of skill through relentless practice. Some signs came easily. Love, sorry, food, the simple, primal concepts that required no translation beyond muscle memory. Others fought him, complex political terms, emotional nuances, the grammatical structures that turned individual signs into actual conversation rather than just pointing at concepts. Sarah was a merciless teacher, correcting his form with the same clinical precision she had once used to set broken bones on the battlefield. "Again," she would say, watching his hands fumble through a sentence about trade negotiations. "You signed war instead of treaty. The difference is 2 fingers and the entire meaning. I am 55 years old. My hands do not bend like yours. Your hands commanded 10,000 men to their deaths. They can learn to say, 'Please pass the bread,' correctly." The bluntness should have offended him. As king, he was not accustomed to being challenged so directly, but Sarah treated him exactly as she treated everyone. With honesty so complete, it became a kind of respect. She did not defer to his crown. She did not soften her criticisms. She simply demanded he do better, and something in Aldric that had been dormant for 20 years responded to that demand. He practiced signs while reviewing reports, while walking the battlements at dawn, while lying awake at night staring at the ceiling and trying not to reach for the whiskey bottle that remained, for the first time in 2 decades, unopened on his desk. The nightmares still came. Blackwater still haunted him. But now when he woke gasping, he thought about his daughter sleeping 3 floors below, about the conversation they would have at breakfast, and the panic slowly began to ease. Lyanna blossomed under attention like a plant finally given water after 15 years of drought. She devoured education with a hunger that left her tutors exhausted. Meister Oren, guilt-driven and determined to make amends, designed a curriculum that treated her as the brilliant mind she had always been. Mathematics, history, political theory, literature, all of it adapted, all of it visual, all of it treating her deafness not as a barrier, but simply as a different way of accessing information. She stopped screaming entirely, not because the frustration disappeared, but because she now had other ways to express it. When sensory overload threatened, she signed too much, and people actually responded by dimming lights, reducing noise, giving her space. When anger built, she signed, "I need a moment," and people let her walk away rather than restraining her. The concept of being allowed to have feelings without punishment was so foreign that for the first few weeks she kept testing it, kept waiting for the trap, kept expecting someone to tell her that her needs were too inconvenient to accommodate. But Sarah never did, and slowly, Aldric learned not to either. Their first real conversation happened 6 weeks after that night in the kitchen. Dinner in the small family dining room, just the 3 of them. Aldric signed slowly, carefully, double-checking each gesture with Sarah before committing. "Tell me about your day." Lyanna's eyes widened. No one had ever asked her that before. The question itself was revolutionary. Her hands moved cautiously at first, then faster as she realized he was actually watching, actually waiting for her response. "I read about the War of Ashmar today, about Blackwater." She paused, her signs becoming more hesitant. "About the 3,000 men who died. Meister Oren said you gave the order, that you sacrificed them to win." The food turned to ash in Aldric's mouth. His hands froze halfway to a response. Sarah watched him carefully, not intervening, letting him navigate this himself. "I did." His signs were stiff, reluctant. "It was the hardest decision I ever made. I chose the kingdom over those men. I chose victory over their lives. Was it the right choice?" The question hung in the air between them. Aldric looked at his daughter, at his wife's eyes staring back at him from a face that was becoming its own person, rather than just a ghost of what he had lost. "I do not know," he signed truthfully. "I won the war. I saved the kingdom. But I see their faces every night. I hear them screaming. I do not know if any victory is worth that price." Lyanna considered this, her young face serious beyond her 15 years. Then she signed something that made Aldric's breath catch. "Mother died so I could live. Did you make the right choice then?" The silence stretched. Sarah started to intervene, to redirect, but Aldric held up one hand. "Wait. Let me answer." He took a breath and signed with a steadiness he did not feel. "Your mother made that choice, not me. She begged me to save you. I would have chosen her. I was selfish enough, cowardly enough to want my wife instead of my daughter. But she was braver than me. She knew you would be extraordinary." His hands trembled slightly. "She was right. You are. Even if I am deaf?" Especially because you are deaf." Aldric's signs became more confident. "You see things I miss. You read people without hearing their words. You built an entire language from nothing because you refused to accept that silence meant you had nothing to say. That is not weakness. That is strength I cannot imagine." Liana's eyes filled with tears. She signed quickly, almost desperately. "I thought you hated me. I thought you could not look at me because I reminded you of her death. Because I was the reason she died." "No." Aldric stood, moved around the table, knelt beside his daughter's chair so their eyes were level. "I could not look at you because I hated myself. Because every time I saw you, I remembered that I let your mother die. That I failed to protect her. That I failed to protect you. I was drowning in my own guilt, and I forgot you were drowning too." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. His hand cupped her face with a gentleness that surprised them both. "You are not the reason your mother died. Childbirth is dangerous. The complications were not your fault. You were a baby, innocent, blameless. The failure was mine, for not being strong enough to separate my grief from my duty as your father." Liana leaned into his palm, her tears falling freely now. Aldric gathered her into his arms and let her cry, signing against her back where she could feel but not see the gestures. "I love you. I am sorry. I love you." Over and over until the words became rhythm, became heartbeat, became the foundation they should have built 15 years ago. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were swollen, but there was something new in her expression. Relief, the kind that came from finally setting down a weight you had carried so long you forgot it was not part of your body. She signed to Sarah, "Thank you for teaching him, for teaching us both." Sarah smiled. "You taught each other. I just provided the grammar." That night, Aldric walked Liana to her chambers, a routine they had developed over the past weeks. At her door, she signed a question that caught him off guard. "Will you tell me a story? About Mother? Something happy?" Aldric's first instinct was to refuse, to retreat behind the walls that had protected him for so long. But he thought about what Sarah had said, that running from the past meant staying trapped in it, that the only way through grief was directly into its heart. He nodded and followed Liana into her sitting room. They settled on the couch, and Aldric began signing, his hands painting pictures in the air. "Your mother loved to dance. She was terrible at it. No sense of rhythm at all. But she did not care. At our wedding, she insisted we dance every song. I stepped on her feet 6 times. She laughed every time." He paused, remembering. She had this laugh that made everyone around her laugh too, like joy was contagious. What else? She read everything. Books, reports, letters from diplomats. She would fall asleep with a book on her chest, and I would have to carefully remove it so she did not crease the pages. She loved stories about ordinary people more than grand adventures. Said real courage was not slaying dragons, but choosing kindness when the world made you hard. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Aldric's signs slowed. "And she wanted you so badly. When the healers said there were complications, that the pregnancy was dangerous, she refused to consider ending it. She said she already loved you, that she could feel your strength even then." Liana wiped her eyes. "I wish I had known her." "Me too, but you carry her in many ways. The stubbornness, the intelligence, the way you refuse to let the world tell you what you cannot do." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "She would have been so proud of you." After Liana fell asleep, Aldric returned to his chambers to find Sarah waiting in the corridor outside. She held a sheaf of papers, her expression carefully neutral in a way that meant trouble. "The council wants to meet tomorrow about the princess's education." "Let them meet. They want you there, and they specifically requested I not attend." Aldric's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because Lord Corvin has been asking questions about my background, about my late husband, about the fact that he died at Blackwater under your command." Sarah's voice remained steady, but her hands clenched the papers. "He is building a narrative. The widow who hates you, the Omega manipulating you through your guilt, the princess being used as a pawn." "That is ridiculous." "That is politics." Sarah met his gaze. "He sees Liana's progress as a threat. If she can communicate, if she can be educated, if she can potentially rule, then whatever candidate he has been grooming for succession becomes irrelevant. You need to be prepared for him to fight dirty." Aldric took the papers, scanning them quickly. Reports on Sarah's past, her service record from the war, her husband's death, her son's death 8 years ago. All of it laid out with clinical precision and carefully highlighted sections that could be twisted to suggest ulterior motives. He investigated you. Thoroughly. Sarah's mouth was a thin line. He even found medical records from when Torrin was ill, when I begged the court physicians for experimental treatments and was refused because resources were needed for military rebuilding. When I wrote angry letters to the throne demanding to know why children's lives were worth less than new armor and siege weapons. You wrote to me? To your office. I never got responses. I assume they were intercepted or discarded. She paused. The point is, Corvin will use those letters to paint me as someone with a grudge, someone who came here to hurt you through Lyanna. Aldric's hand moved to where his sword would have hung. His alpha nature stirred, protective instincts rising. I will not allow him to attack you. You may not have a choice. The council can make my position untenable. They can demand I be removed for the princess's safety. They can force you to choose between me and political stability. Sarah's eyes were steady. I need you to be ready for that possibility. There is no possibility. You stay. End of discussion. Your Majesty. Aldric. He cut her off. When it is just us, call me Aldric. I am tired of titles and formality and the distance they create. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. That would be inappropriate. Everything about this situation is inappropriate. An Omega teaching a king. A widow befriending the man who gave the order that killed her husband. A servant having more access to the princess than most of the nobility. He stepped closer, and Sarah caught his scent, that distinctive alpha musk that made her Omega instincts stir despite years of battlefield trauma overriding such responses. But inappropriate does not mean wrong. They stood in the quiet corridor, torchlight casting shadows that made the space feel smaller, more intimate. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time since she arrived, Aldric saw past the capable exterior to the exhaustion underneath. She had been working 16-hour days teaching Lyanna, teaching him, teaching anyone in the palace willing to learn. She had taken on the weight of bridging 15 years of isolation in 3 months. She was burning herself out, and no one had noticed. When did you last sleep a full night? The question surprised her. I sleep fine. That is not what I asked. Sarah's jaw tightened. Sleep is not a luxury I can afford right now. It is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Aldric kept his voice gentle, deliberately softening the alpha command that wanted to seep through. You cannot save Lyanna if you collapse from exhaustion. You cannot teach if your mind is too tired to form signs correctly. And you cannot help me become a better father if you will not let anyone help you. I do not need help. Everyone needs help. I learned that from an Omega who was brave enough to tell a king he was a coward. He smiled slightly. Consider this me returning the favor. You are trying to carry everything alone. Let someone else carry part of the weight. Sarah's eyes glittered with unshed tears. If I stop moving, if I stop working, I will remember why I am really here. Not just to help Lyanna, but because helping her means I did not fail my son completely. If I can save her, maybe Torrin's death was not meaningless. The confession hung between them, raw and painful. Aldric understood that particular kind of guilt. The survivor's need to make meaning from loss, to justify why you lived when others died. Torrin's death was not your fault. I know that intellectually, but knowing and believing are different things. She wiped her eyes roughly. You understand that better than most. I do. He paused. Which is why I know that punishing yourself will not bring him back. Trust me. I spent 15 years trying. Sarah laughed, a broken sound. We are a pair, are we not? 2 guilt-ridden fools trying to fix the past by fixing the present. At least we are trying. That is more than I managed for 15 years. They stood together in the corridor, 2 damaged people holding each other up in the only way they knew how. Sarah's Omega instincts whispered that this alpha was safe, was protective, was worth trusting. She had learned to ignore such instincts after her husband's death, but with Aldric, the pull was harder to resist. Eventually, Sarah straightened, wiping the last traces of tears from her face. The council meeting is at noon. What will you tell them? The truth. That Lyanna is thriving. That her education is proceeding excellently. That you are not going anywhere. His voice hardened, alpha authority reasserting itself. And that if Lord Corvin has concerns about my judgment, he is welcome to challenge me directly, rather than hiding behind political maneuvering. That will force a confrontation. Good. I am tired of shadows and whispers. Let him bring his accusations into the light. The council chamber was a circular room in the oldest part of the keep, built from stone so ancient it predated the kingdom itself. 12 seats arranged around a heavy oak table, each representing a different faction of power. Military, religious, economic, noble houses, all of them theoretically equal, all of them actually engaged in constant subtle warfare for the king's favor. Lord Corvin Ashford occupied the seat directly opposite the king's throne. 55 years old, beta, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy until you noticed the eyes. Cold, calculating, utterly devoid of warmth. He had served on the council for 20 years, surviving 3 regime changes and 2 assassination attempts through a combination of careful neutrality and strategic betrayals. He stood as Aldric entered, bowing just deeply enough to be respectful, and not 1 degree more. "Your Majesty, thank you for attending." "This is my council. Why would I not attend?" "Of course. Forgive me. I only meant that you have been occupied with personal matters lately. We did not wish to disturb your time with the princess." The words were polite. The implication was not. Aldric took his seat, and the weight of his alpha presence filled the room. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Power recognized, even when quiet. "You called this meeting. Speak your purpose." Corvin spread several documents across the table. Reports, medical records, letters, all concerning Sarah. "We have concerns about Sarah Ashwood's influence over both Your Majesty and Princess Lyanna." "Explain these concerns." "Mistress Ashwood is Omega. Her husband died at Blackwater under your command. Her son died 8 years ago from complications related to blood fade disease, for which court physicians denied experimental treatment due to resource allocation." Corvin's voice remained neutral, almost bored. "She has written multiple angry letters to the Crown over the years, expressing her dissatisfaction with military spending priorities. She wrote as a grieving mother advocating for her dying child. I fail to see how that represents a threat." "Because, Your Majesty, it establishes motive. A woman who blames you for 2 deaths in her family is now in a position of unprecedented influence over your daughter." Corvin leaned forward. "How can we be certain she does not intend harm?" "Because I have seen her with Lyanna. I have witnessed her patience, her skill, her genuine care, or what appears to be genuine care. Omegas are naturally talented at emotional manipulation. It is their survival mechanism in a world dominated by alphas." Corvin's smile was thin. "I mean no disrespect to the designation. I merely point out biological reality." Aldric's hands clenched beneath the table. The insult to Sarah, to her designation, made his alpha instincts flare protectively. "If you have an accusation, make it directly." "Very well. I believe Mistress Ashwood came to this castle with the intent to hurt you through Princess Lyanna. I believe she is isolating the princess from proper oversight, teaching her subversive ideas, potentially even preparing her to challenge your authority when she comes of age." "That is insane." "Is it? The princess has been completely transformed in 3 months, from violent and uncontrollable to docile and compliant. That kind of change does not happen naturally. It suggests conditioning, manipulation." Corvin's voice dropped to something like concern. "Your Majesty, I fear you are being used, that your grief and guilt are being exploited by someone with a long-standing grudge." The other council members shifted uncomfortably. Several nodded slightly, agreeing with Corvin's assessment. Others looked uncertain, caught between loyalty to the king and fear of the narrative being constructed. Aldric stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute command, the voice that had led 10,000 men into battle, the voice that had sentenced traitors to death, the voice of a king who had tolerated quite enough. His alpha dominance rolled through the room like thunder. "You speak of manipulation, of ulterior motives, of threats to my daughter." He placed both hands flat on the table, leaning forward. "But the only manipulation I see is yours. The only ulterior motive is your desire to control the succession. The only threat to Lyanna is people like you who refuse to accept that a deaf princess can be educated, competent, and worthy of the throne." "Your Majesty, I merely—" "You investigated a member of my household without authorization. You compiled personal medical records, private correspondence, and confidential war reports. You built a case designed to discredit the one person who has done more for my daughter in 3 months than everyone else managed in 15 years. Aldric's eyes were ice. "And you dare call it concern." Corvin's mask slipped slightly, a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. I am trying to protect you from a mistake. No, you are trying to protect your political position. You have been grooming your nephew for succession since the moment Lyanna was diagnosed as deaf. You have spent years spreading whispers that she is incapable, unstable, unfit. And now that she is proving you wrong, you are desperate to remove the obstacle standing between your family and the crown. That is a serious accusation. Then prove me wrong. Tell this council honestly that you have not been positioning your nephew as heir. Tell them you have not been meeting with noble houses to build support for his claim. Tell them you have not been waiting for me to die so you can install a puppet king and rule through him. Silence. Corvin's face hardened, all pretense of concern evaporating. Very well. Since you force the issue, yes. I have been preparing for a future where the princess cannot rule. Because, Your Majesty, with all due respect, a deaf queen is a liability this kingdom cannot afford. Our enemies will see her as weakness. Trade partners will refuse to negotiate with someone they cannot speak to. The military will not follow a commander they cannot hear. The military follows competence, not volume. And Lyanna is more competent than half this council combined. She is 15 years old. At 15, I had already commanded my first battalion. Age is not the issue here. Your prejudice is. Corvin stood as well, all civility abandoned. You are blinded by guilt. You spent 15 years ignoring your daughter, and now you are overcompensating by pretending her disability does not matter. But it does matter. It will always matter. And no amount of sign language will change that fundamental reality. Then allow me to demonstrate exactly how much sign language changes reality. Aldric strode to the chamber doors and threw them open. Lyanna stood in the corridor with Sarah beside her, both of them clearly having been listening. Lyanna's face was pale but determined. She had asked to come, to face the council, to prove herself. Aldric had initially refused, but Sarah had convinced him. She needs to fight her own battles eventually. This is as good a place as any to start. Lyanna entered the chamber, her posture straight despite the hostile stares. She walked directly to the center of the room and began signing, her hands moving with precise, deliberate clarity. Sarah translated, her voice carrying to every corner. My name is Princess Lyanna Stormborn. I am 15 years old. I am deaf, and I am not incapable. Corvin started to interrupt, but Aldric held up a hand, his alpha command brooking no argument. Silence. Let her speak. I cannot hear you, but I can read your faces. I know Lord Corvin thinks I am weak. I know half of you agree with him. I know you have been planning for a future where I am set aside for someone more convenient. Her signs became sharper, more forceful. But I am not going anywhere. This is my birthright. This is my kingdom, and I will not let prejudice disguise itself as concern. Princess, no one is questioning your birthright. Corvin's tone was patronizing. We are merely discussing the practical challenges. Of having a deaf queen. Yes, I heard you. Through Sarah's translation. Another practical solution you are choosing to ignore. Lyanna's eyes blazed. You speak of enemies seeing me as weak, but what is weaker? A queen who faces her challenges directly? Or a council that hides behind a child's disability because they are too cowardly to admit their real objections? The chamber went absolutely silent. Several council members looked shocked, others impressed. Corvin's face had gone dangerously neutral. You have been well coached in rhetoric. I have been well educated, which is what happens when people bother to teach rather than dismiss. Lyanna signed to Sarah, who produced several documents from a leather folder. These are my examination results from the past 3 months. Mathematics, history, political theory, military strategy. I have scored higher than the average noble heir in every subject. My tutors will testify that I not only understand the material, but can apply it critically. She walked to the table and spread the documents where everyone could see. Test scores, essays, detailed strategic analyses of historical battles, all of it bearing the signatures of respected scholars who had examined her work. I am not asking for special treatment. I am demanding equal consideration. Teach the kingdom sign language. Train interpreters. Adapt communication systems. These are not impossible tasks. They are simply tasks you do not want to attempt because it is easier to replace me than to accommodate me. Lyanna turned to face the full council, her stance wide and grounded, a warrior princess despite her small frame. But I will not be replaced. I will not be set aside. I will not let you use my deafness as an excuse to steal my throne. Her signs slowed, became heavy with meaning. My mother died giving me life. My father spent 15 years running from the guilt of that choice. I will not dishonor either of them by surrendering without a fight." When Sarah finished translating, the silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable. Finally, one of the military advisors, General Thorne's uncle, stood. "The princess has fire. I like fire in a leader. She has my support." Another council member, a merchant lord, nodded slowly. "My daughter is also deaf. I sent her to live with relatives in the country because I could not bear the shame. If the princess can be educated, perhaps—" One by one, several council members shifted allegiance, their expressions moving from hostility to consideration. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Corvin remained standing, his face carved from stone. "This changes nothing. The practical concerns remain regardless of test scores or pretty speeches." "Then let us address practical concerns." Aldric's voice was quiet but absolute. "You will oversee the creation of a royal interpreter corps. You will work with Meister Oren to develop standardized sign language education for all noble children. You will research how other kingdoms have handled similar situations and provide recommendations for implementation." "Your Majesty, this is not a request. This is a command. You have two choices, Lord Corvin. Help make this work, or resign your position and explain to your peers why you abandoned the council rather than adapt to your future queen's needs." Corvin's jaw worked silently. The trap was perfect. Resign and lose all influence. Stay and be forced to work toward the very outcome he wanted to prevent. After a long moment, he bowed stiffly. "As your Majesty commands." "Good. This council is dismissed." As the members filed out, several approached Lyanna to offer congratulations or apologies. She handled each interaction with grace, signing responses that Sarah translated with pride evident in her voice. When only the three of them remained, Lyanna finally let her composure crack. She signed to her father with shaking hands. "Did I do well?" "You were magnificent." Aldric pulled her into a hug. "Your mother would have been so proud." "I was terrified. So was I at my first council meeting. You hide it better than I did." They stood together in the empty chamber, father and daughter, bound by blood and something stronger. Understanding, hard-won and fiercely protected. Sarah watched them with a soft expression, already mentally cataloging the work ahead. Training interpreters, standardizing curriculum, defending against the inevitable next attack because men like Corvin did not surrender easily. But for now, for this moment, they had won. The victory would not last long. That evening, as Sarah walked the eastern corridor toward her quarters, a figure stepped from the shadows. Lord Corvin, his face carefully blank, his hands clasped behind his back. "A word, Mistress Ashwood." Sarah stopped but did not approach. "I have nothing to say to you, Lord Corvin." "Perhaps, but I have something to say to you." He stepped into the torchlight. "You are very clever, using the princess to secure your position, teaching her just enough to make herself useful. It is an elegant scheme." "It is not a scheme, it is education. Call it what you like, but know this." Corvin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I have spent 20 years building power in this castle. I will not allow an Omega servant to undo that work because she has a personal vendetta against the king." "I have no vendetta." "Your husband died at a Blackwater. Your son died because resources were allocated to military rebuilding instead of medical research. You have every reason to hate King Aldric." Corvin smiled thinly. "I do not blame you for that hatred. I merely warn you against acting on it through the princess." "You see plots where there are none." "Do I? Or am I simply seeing clearly while everyone else is blinded by the novelty of the cursed princess learning to communicate?" He leaned closer. "You are very good at what you do. The patience, the dedication, the way you have made yourself indispensable. But I am better at what I do, and what I do is remove obstacles." "Is that a threat?" "It is a promise. The king trusts you. The princess loves you. You have carved out a position of unique influence. But positions of influence are also positions of vulnerability. One mistake, one scandal, one perfectly timed revelation, and you will fall." Corvin straightened. "I am a patient man. I can wait for that mistake." He walked away, leaving Sarah alone in the corridor with her heart pounding and the distinct feeling that everything was about to become much more complicated. She did not know how right she was. 3 floors above, in his private chambers, Aldric stood at the window watching the sun set over the training yard. For the first time in 15 years, the nightmares had started to fade. For the first time since Isolde died, he could imagine a future beyond mere survival. He thought about Sarah, about the way she challenged him without flinching, about her competence and her compassion, and the fact that she made him want to be better than he was. He thought about the way his daughter smiled now, about the conversations they had, about the family they were becoming. He thought about the whiskey bottle that had sat untouched for 3 months, the seal unbroken, the amber liquid unchanged because he no longer needed oblivion to sleep. Hope, he realized, was more dangerous than despair, because despair had nothing left to lose. But hope created vulnerability, stakes, things that could be taken away. And in his experience, anything that could be taken away eventually would be. But for tonight, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them, that the hard part was over, that they had weathered the storm and could now sail toward calmer waters. He had survived war, he had survived loss, he had survived 15 years of darkness. Surely he could survive peace. He was wrong, because far to the north, beyond the borders of the kingdom, a man with cruel eyes and a bitter heart received a message. 3 words, unsigned, untraceable. The king softens. General Cale Voss, who had survived Blackwater through luck and stubbornness, who had spent 20 years rebuilding strength in exile, who had sworn vengeance on the man who had sacrificed 3,000 lives for victory, smiled coldly and began preparing for war. The messenger arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with foam, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. He collapsed at the gates of Ravencrest Keep and spoke 2 words before losing consciousness. Cale lives. Commander Thorne brought the news to Aldric's chambers personally, his expression carved from stone. The king was already awake, had been awake for hours, standing at his window watching the sun rise over mountains that suddenly seemed less like protection and more like a cage. How many? The scouts estimate 50,000, maybe more. They have been gathering for months in the Ashmar territories. Professional soldiers, mercenaries, conscripts from the occupied regions. Kyle has built an army while we slept peacefully in our beds. Aldric's hands gripped the windowsill hard enough to make the wood creak. 20 years. 20 years since Blackwater, since he had given the order that killed 3,000 of his own men to win a war. Since Cale Voss, his second-in-command, his friend, had led that doomed charge and disappeared into the carnage. Not dead, never dead, just waiting. What are his demands? Thorne hesitated, and that hesitation told Aldric everything he needed to know before the words came. He sent a letter, addressed to you personally. The commander held out a sealed envelope, the wax stamped with a symbol Aldric recognized. The wolf of House Voss, twisted and broken, bleeding from its throat. I have not read it, but the messenger screamed the message before he fainted. Kyle wants Princess Lyanna. He says if you deliver her to Blackwater Ridge in 20 days, he will withdraw his forces. If not, he will march on the capital and salt the earth. The letter felt heavy in Aldric's hands. He broke the seal and read, Cale's handwriting as familiar as his own, neat and precise and utterly cold. Brother, you took 3,000 of my men. You sent them to die knowing they would not survive, knowing their sacrifice would buy you victory, knowing I would have to watch them burn. I have spent 20 years in the darkness you condemned me to, living in caves, eating rats, dreaming of this moment. I do not want your kingdom. I do not want your crown. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to choose between someone you love and something you need. I want you to sacrifice your daughter the way you sacrificed my sons. Deliver Princess Lyanna to Blackwater Ridge. I will kill her quickly, mercifully, in front of your eyes. Then I will leave. The kingdom will be spared. Your people will live. All it costs is 1 life, 1 child for 50,000 citizens. You taught me that mathematics. Now prove you still believe it. You have 20 days. Your brother in arms, Cale Voss. Aldric read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking more with each pass. When he finally looked up, Thorne was watching him with an expression that held no judgment, only understanding. The understanding of one soldier who knew what impossible choices looked like. What will you do? I will kill him. Aldric's voice was empty of everything except certainty. His alpha nature rose to the surface, cold and deadly. I will march every soldier we have to Blackwater, and I will kill him for daring to threaten my daughter. We have maybe 5,000 trained soldiers, another 3,000 militia we could call up in a week, Against 50,000 professional troops, we will lose. Then we lose. Your Majesty, if you fall, the kingdom falls. Corvin will seize power. Everything we have built for Lyanna will crumble. You must think strategically. I am thinking strategically. Aldric moved to his armor stand, where his battle gear hung dusty and unused for 2 decades. The strategy is I do not negotiate with men who threaten children. The strategy is I will die before I let Kyle touch my daughter. The strategy is some things are worth more than crowns and kingdoms. He began strapping on armor that felt both foreign and perfectly familiar, muscle memory from another life taking over. Thorn watched for a moment, then began helping with the buckles and ties, the ritual of preparing for war performed in heavy silence. She will want to fight. Aldric's hands stilled. Lyanna? She is her father's daughter. When she learns of this threat, she will offer herself to save the kingdom, to spare the casualties. She will believe it is the noble choice. Thorn met his eyes. You need to be prepared for that argument. I will not hear that argument. I will not entertain it. I will not allow her to sacrifice herself for my failures. It was not your failure at Blackwater. It was war. War demands horrible choices. War is what I make it. I chose to sacrifice Kyle's unit. I chose victory over honor, and now my daughter pays for that choice unless I can stop it. Aldric fastened the last buckle and picked up his sword, the weight settling into his palm like greeting an old friend. Summon the War Council. We march in 3 days. The War Council convened within the hour. Aldric's alpha dominance filled the chamber like a physical presence, making lesser wolves shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the grief-hollowed king they had grown accustomed to. This was the warrior who had conquered Ashmar. Gentlemen, we are going to war. The announcement created instant chaos. Questions shouted over one another, protests about readiness and strategy, and the fact that nobody had been expecting military action. Aldric let it wash over him for 30 seconds, then released a fraction of his alpha power. The room went silent instantly, every wolf's instinct recognizing dominance. General Kyle Voss survived Blackwater. He has spent 20 years building an army. He now marches on us with 50,000 troops and a demand that I deliver Princess Lyanna to be executed. I will not be fulfilling that demand. Instead, we will meet him with every sword we can muster, and we will show him that threatening this kingdom's heir is a death sentence. Your Majesty, with respect, we cannot win against 50,000. The military advisor's voice was strained. Our forces are not prepared for a campaign of that scale. We would need months to mobilize properly, to train, to establish supply lines. 3 days is suicide. Then we die, but we die fighting. We die protecting what matters. We do not die cowering behind walls hoping the monster goes away. This is madness. Lord Corvin's voice cut through the murmurs. You would sacrifice the entire kingdom for one girl. I would sacrifice everything for my daughter, yes. That is not leadership. That is selfishness disguised as nobility. Aldric moved faster than anyone expected, crossing the room in 3 strides and slamming Corvin against the wall. His alpha presence exploded through the room, making every person there feel the weight of true dominance, not performed, not pretended, real. You will not speak of my daughter that way. You will not reduce her life to mathematics and strategic value. She is a person. She is my child. And if you spent less time calculating how to use this crisis for your own advancement and more time thinking about how to actually help, you might be worth the seat you occupy. He released Corvin and turned back to the council, his power still crackling through the air. Anyone else want to suggest I sacrifice Lyanna? Silence. Even those who agreed with Corvin were smart enough not to say so aloud. Good. Now let us discuss how we fight. The planning session lasted 6 hours. It was brutally clear they could not win through conventional warfare, but Thorn had an idea. A fighting retreat through Blackwater Ridge, using the terrain to their advantage, trading space for time, allowing civilians to evacuate while the army bled Kyle's forces in a series of delaying actions. It could work, Aldric said finally, but it requires soldiers willing to die in rearguard actions. I will lead those actions myself. Your Majesty, you cannot— I can and I will. Kyle wants me at Blackwater? Then I will be at Blackwater, just not the way he expects. Late that afternoon, Aldric went to tell Lyanna. He found her in the library with Sarah, both of them reviewing political theory texts. When they saw his face, the armor he still wore, the sword at his hip, they both understood immediately. Lyanna's hands moved before he could speak. "You are going to war." "Yes." "Because of me." Aldric closed the distance between them, knelt so their eyes were level, and signed with careful precision. "Not because of you. Because I made a choice 20 years ago that created an enemy. Because I sacrificed his men to win a war, and he wants revenge. This is not your fault. This is mine. But he wants me. If I go to him, the war stops. The kingdom is safe. You do not have to die. I am not letting you die in my place." "Why not?" Lyanna's signs became sharp, angry. "You let 3,000 men die in someone else's place. You chose the kingdom over their lives. Why is this different?" The question hit like the physical blow. Aldric sat back on his heels, the weight of his own logic turned against him. "Because I was wrong." His signs were slow, heavy with regret. "I convinced myself that sacrificing those men was necessary, that the mathematics of war justified it, that victory made their deaths meaningful. But I have spent 20 years drowning in guilt because deep down I knew it was wrong. I knew I had become the kind of leader who treats people as numbers rather than lives. So you choose differently now. You choose me over the kingdom." "No. I choose you and the kingdom. I choose to fight for both. I choose to believe that we do not have to trade your life for their safety, that there is a way to win without that sacrifice." "What if there is not?" Aldric pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her tight against his armored chest. "Then I die trying, but I will not. I cannot watch you walk to your death. I have failed you in every way a father can fail a daughter, but I will not fail you in this. I will not let you believe your life is worth less than anyone else's." Lyanna trembled against him, tears soaking into the leather straps of his armor. When she pulled back, her signs were calmer but no less determined. "If you die, I will hate Kael forever, but I will also hate you for leaving me, for finally being my father and then abandoning me again. That is fair. I will deserve that hate. I do not want to hate you. I want you to stay alive. I want you to come home. I will try, that is all I can promise." Outside the library, Sarah waited. When Aldric emerged, she was already wearing the padded leather of a battlefield medic, stained and worn and carried across 2 decades. "What are you doing?" "Coming with you." "Absolutely not. You do not get to decide that. I am a battlefield surgeon. I have saved more lives in war than you have, and I will not sit here while men die because I was too comfortable to help." Her voice was iron, her Omega nature buried beneath years of trauma and determination. "Besides, someone needs to keep you alive long enough to come home to Lyanna. This is not your fight." "It became my fight the moment I started caring about that girl, and about you." Sarah met his eyes. "Do not make me stay behind. Do not make me helpless while people I love march into danger." The confession hung between them. People I love, not person, people, plural. Aldric wanted to argue, wanted to protect her the way he was protecting Lyanna. But he saw in her face the same determination his daughter had shown, the same refusal to be kept safe at the cost of agency. And beneath it all, his alpha instincts recognized her choice, respected it, even as every protective urge screamed against it. "You stay with the medical corps, behind the lines. You do not engage in combat." "Agreed." "And if the position becomes overrun, you retreat. No heroics, no last stands. You run and you live." "Agreed." "And when this is over, when we come home, you will let me properly court you like you deserve, with flowers and poetry and all the ridiculous romantic nonsense I have forgotten how to do." Sarah's eyes widened. "Your Majesty." "Aldric, when it is just us, always Aldric." "Aldric, you cannot court me. I am Omega. You are the king. The scandal would be nothing compared to marching into likely death without telling you how I feel." He took her hands. "You came into my life and reminded me I was more than guilt and whiskey. You taught me how to speak to my daughter. You made me want to be the man I was before Blackwater broke me. And if I die without telling you that I love you, I will count it as the greatest regret of my life. You love me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I love you. Desperately. Completely. In the most inconvenient way possible." He smiled slightly. "So please do not die at Blackwater, because I would very much like to see where this goes." Sarah stood on her toes and kissed him, quick and fierce and filled with everything she could not sign. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Come home. Both of us come home, and then we will figure out the rest." "Deal." The army marched at dawn. 8,000 soldiers against 50,000. Not enough to win, but enough to make Kyle bleed for his revenge. The battle at Blackwater Ridge raged for 3 days. Aldric's strategy worked, the narrow valley forcing Kyle's advantage into a grinding meat grinder. But slowly, inevitably, they were pushed back. Each retreat cost lives, soldiers who volunteered for rearguard duty, knowing they would not survive. Aldric fought among them, his alpha presence keeping men fighting when exhaustion and despair threatened to break them. He was everywhere the line was weakest, everywhere the danger was greatest. Sarah worked in the field hospital, her hands covered in blood, saving dozens, losing dozens more. On the 3rd day, Kyle himself entered the battle. He cut through Aldric's lines with singular purpose, seeking the king. They met in the center of the carnage, 2 old soldiers surrounded by death. The duel was brutal. Not graceful swordplay, but desperate, vicious fighting of men pushed past limits. Aldric was slower than 20 years ago. His wounds accumulated, but he kept fighting. "Just die!" Kyle screamed. "Just die and let this be over!" "Not yet!" Aldric blocked another strike. "Not until you understand. I am sorry. I am sorry I sacrificed your men. I am sorry I chose wrong. I am sorry for 20 years of your pain. I am sorry." "Your apology means nothing." "I know." Aldric's sword finally found an opening, cutting deep into Kyle's arm. "But I say it anyway, because I need you to know I carry this guilt. That I am not the heartless monster you think. That I am just a man who made terrible choices and has paid for them every single day since." Kyle dropped his sword, his arm useless. But instead of surrendering, he drew a knife and lunged. Aldric caught his wrist, but Kyle's momentum carried them both to the ground, the knife inches from Aldric's throat. "My son was in that unit," Kyle whispered, his voice breaking. "My boy, 19 years old, barely a man. You sent him to die and I had to watch. I had to watch my son burn and I could not save him." Aldric's grip on Kyle's wrist faltered. "I did not know. Kyle, I did not know." "Would it have mattered? Would you have chosen differently if you knew you were killing my child?" The question was everything. The knife pressed closer. "No," Aldric whispered. "I would have made the same choice, and I will hate myself for it until the day I die." Something in Kyle broke. The knife trembled. Tears fell onto Aldric's face. "I should kill you." "Yes?" "I should kill you and your daughter and everyone you love." "Yes." "Why do you not fight back?" "Because you have earned this. Because I owe you this. Because some debts can only be paid in blood." Aldric closed his eyes. "So take it. Take your revenge. But please, please, let my daughter live. She is innocent in this. Let her live." The knife pressed against skin, drew blood. One thrust, and it would be over. Kyle's hand shook violently, his face contorted with rage and grief and loneliness. "I cannot." The words came out broken. "I cannot do it. I cannot become the thing I hate. I cannot kill a man begging for mercy. I cannot make your daughter feel what I felt when they told me my son was dead." He threw the knife away and collapsed beside Aldrich, sobbing. "I am so tired. I am so tired of being angry. I am so tired of living for revenge. I just want my son back. I just want to not hurt anymore." Aldrich pulled himself upright. "I cannot give you your son back, but I can give you something else." "What?" "A choice. You can kill me and feel empty because revenge does not actually heal anything, or you can help me. Help me build something worth what we lost. Help me make sure no father ever has to send his son to die for someone else's strategy." "You are mad." "Probably, but I'm also serious. Join me, Kyle. Not as my soldier, as my brother. We have both lost too much to keep fighting." Kyle stared at him. Around them, the battle had stopped, both armies watching. "If I do this, if I call off my army, your daughter lives." "Yes." "And you swear you will never ask another father to sacrifice his son the way you asked me?" "I swear, on my wife's memory, on my daughter's future, on whatever shred of honor I have left, never again." Kyle climbed to his feet, extended his hand to his enemy, his brother, his old friend. "Then I accept, brothers again, at the end, as we were at the beginning." Aldric took the hand and let Kyle pull him upright. And then the arrow came. No one saw who fired it. Some soldier unwilling to accept peace. The arrow struck Aldric in the chest, punched through damaged armor, sank deep into his lung. He staggered. Kyle caught him. Together they collapsed. Sarah was there within seconds. She assessed the wound. Bad. Very bad. The kind men did not survive. But she worked anyway. 4 hours of surgery, removing the arrow, sealing the lung, fighting death with every skill she possessed. When it was over, when Aldric lay pale and unconscious but breathing, Sarah allowed herself 30 seconds to cry. Then she went to find Kael and told him that if the king died, she would finish the job herself. Aldric woke 3 days later in his own bed at Ravencrest Keep. The first thing he saw was Lyanna asleep in a chair beside his bed. The second was Sarah at the window. He tried to speak and managed only a croak. Both women jerked awake. "Easy, do not try to talk. Your lung is healing, but it needs time." Aldric managed to lift one hand and sign. "Did we win?" "You made peace. Kael has withdrawn his forces. He is meeting with your council about integration." Sarah's smile was strained. "You almost died. Again." "Sorry. Do not apologize. Just do not do it again." Lyanna signed with shaking hands. "You scared me. You promised to come home and then you almost did not. I am here. Stubborn, remember? Too stubborn." "Exactly." They held each other. Sarah fussed with bandages, the healer hiding the terrified woman underneath. When Lyanna stepped back, Aldric signed to Sarah, "You saved me. I'm a very good surgeon. You love me." "Yes, inconveniently and completely I love you." "Marry me." "You just survived an arrow to the lung." "Marry me anyway." Sarah looked between father and daughter. "This is ridiculous." "Completely. The scandal will be enormous." "Good. I am tired of conventions." Aldric met her eyes. "Marry me. Not because it is proper, but because we have survived too much to pretend we do not deserve happiness." Lyanna signed excitedly. "Say yes, please say yes." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Aldric pulled her down for a kiss that made his chest scream, but he did not care. They married 3 months later. Kael attended, somber but peaceful. The kingdom adjusted. A deaf princess, an Omega queen, sign language becoming standard. 10 years passed. Aldric never fully recovered. He walked with a cane, tired easily. But he was alive, happy. He taught Lyanna everything about ruling, and at 25 she became queen, strong, certain, fluent in 7 languages. When Aldric finally died at 68, he did so peacefully, Sarah's hand in his, a smile on his face. The nightmares had stopped. The guilt had faded. He died knowing his daughter would be extraordinary, that his wife would continue making the world better. His funeral was attended by thousands. Kael stood at the grave and saluted. Lyanna stood between Sarah and Kael, signing a eulogy translated to the crowd. He was a king who learned to listen, not with his ears, but with his heart. And that made all the difference. Years later, historians would write about King Aldric's final campaign, how he turned enemy into ally, transformed attitudes toward disability, built a legacy not on conquest, but connection. But those who loved him remembered simpler truths. A man who found his way home, a father who learned his daughter's language, a soldier who chose peace, a king who discovered real strength was getting back up one more time than you fell. In the royal library sat Lyanna's childhood journal, 247 signs created in desperation. Beside it, a note in Aldric's hand. She was never broken. She was speaking. We just needed to learn how to listen. The kingdom learned, and in learning became something greater than it had been before. The end.